And it don't feel like we're picking it for this assignment and then that's it. Like I don't get to use the red now because it didn't work. We'll have other places where using that, we'll try to use every system at least a little bit this semester. I want you guys to get a lot of experience. One of our favorites right now, and this is athletics, this isn't ours, so that's why I didn't put it on the list. Otherwise, this would probably be one of my main first picks for you. The Sony FX3 is the best low light camera we have at the college. It'll go up to 12,000 ISO and still have a great image, which is I don't even know, like 6 times more than what we can do on most of the other ones. Like 2500 is like one of the other close high ISO ranges. This one is amazing at night. The pilot episode I shot in Atlanta last October, November, we used 2 of those 2-cam setup the whole time. We actually had 3, but we very seldom switched to that 3rd angle and shot our entire pilot with it, and it looks amazing. It just does 4K, but it does 4K really, really, really well, up to 4K, 120 frames per second. Not a big fan of the top handle. We usually take that off and kit out a monitor on top and other stuff. Normally we have a separated audio person, so this is really great for kind of run and gun audio and documentary type stuff, but unnecessary for a lot of what I do. Now, this comes out just under $4,000, about $3,800. It's pretty affordable for a cinema camera, but they have a smaller version called the FX30 that's under $2,000. And if I was leaving this program, that would be one of the cameras I'd be considering buying. We have Kiowa County Media Center, one of our alumni. That's what he uses as his main camera. Shot graduation with it for us. Just a beautiful image, and it's not even 2,000 bucks. It has a couple more limitations, but mainly it just doesn't come with that top handle. That's the big thing. Diving way back, this was what we used when I was in the program. Massive broadcast, I don't know what year, 80s probably. Super expensive. I mean, you could buy a small house for what these probably cost to kit out a studio back in the day. Typically 3 of them was pretty standard for us. So you have one crisscross, and then one down the middle. I keep it around because just kind of show. I've seen TV stations like KPTS still using this stuff even now, but they were made to last forever, and they really are old relics, but built really tough. Another camera that I love, the Canon R5. It's a mirrorless. The limitation being that it takes RF mount lenses. There's not a lot of those made yet. Canon hasn't released that technology out for third-party like Sigma and Rokinon and these other smaller brands to start utilizing. Once they do that, there's going to be even a better push. But this one will do 8K, which is the only 8K-centric camera in the program. It does 4K 120. The 8K overheats almost immediately. When I'm shooting nature out in the field, if I have any sort of direct sunlight, it will shut down. And it's shut down in 8K indoors in controlled environments. So it does have its limitations. It is really a photography camera at its soul, and that's what I primarily use it for myself. But it is a really cool camera. It just has some of those, when the camera's overheating, that really stops the whole production. It really kills you. Staying small, another mirrorless. The newer camera for most students, G85, and we have several of these. This is a viable option considering you might want multiple cameras in various places that don't weigh very much. We have 1 million batteries. It takes a small SD card and it runs forever. Whereas these cameras take very expensive cards. And most of that stuff takes, even some of them are proprietary media sources. So one negative, it's a micro four thirds, meaning super tiny sensor, the smallest sensor that we have in any of our cameras that we're currently utilizing. So it does not hold a lot of light. It can't catch much light. If you're talking outdoors, you're not going to be able to control that. So one of the things that gets to be kind of a bummer as you go small, one of the things you lack is that neutral density ND filters that won't allow you to block light. So then you have to have additional attachments that go on whatever lens you're using. So everything is a give and take. There is not going to be a perfect camera for anything, but you can try and figure out what tool to utilize to best get across that story. Then the C100s, Zoe's got one. We have one right there. That one's been recording since I started setting up for a time lapse, and it still has over half the battery. And my 256 gigabyte card said it would record like 1,200 minutes. If you take the C100s out, you'll have multiple cameras, batteries that last the entire time. One really great color profile, but again, you guys probably aren't really interested in a ton of color for this piece. And they also take the EF mount lenses. So these are really one of the most robust, powerful cameras that we have, and we definitely, and part of that is just in the fact that we have inventory as well. So the monitor, or the sensor in it is a 4K sensor, but it scales it down to 1080p. So it looks really, really nice for 1080p. I just shot the last project Zoe and I did right at the end of summer. We used those. Before any of those other cameras, that was what we picked, because we knew we only needed 1080p. There was no reason to export in 4K, to record in 4K, because we had the numbers of them. At the Fox, when this screens, everything I've ever screened at the Fox was exported in 1080p. I've never screened anything in 4K, and probably screened at least a dozen films there. So in that case, 4K is great, it's sexy, everyone's like, I need to have 4K, all the way up to our 12K, but quite honestly, if you know what you're doing, setting up your stuff, 1080p is still great. Just gotta make sure you get your things lit correctly, get the composition that you need, so you don't have to crop in 8 times, you know. There's benefits to 12K, there's benefits to 8K, but if you control your environment, 1080p is great. And so that's one of the reasons why that last project that we did, it was just not necessary to be shooting in 4 and 8K. Plus you're on a timeline, and if Alex is running the post-production team with some other people, whoever, if you're trying to process 8K files for 2 days, you're gonna lose time. And 1080p, you're gonna be working in it as soon as you get back and duplicate it. It's just gonna run really fast. So you're gonna save time in post. I wanted to pull out a couple of, well, let's just look at this real fast. This is the Sony NEX. Brandon uses these for athletics, has used them for athletics as long as we've had these C100s around, 6, 7 or so odd years. They are beasts. They've shot hundreds of projects. I think he has 4 of them. And for some reason, this one's just sitting out, so I grabbed it. They're really, really awesome little cameras. This is what he shot his Straw Hat short film on too. Really more broadcast-centric to me and some of the components, but super, super robust. They get the job done. 1080, 60, they don't do 4K. They're aged out, they don't make them anymore. So that's why he started purchasing things like the FX3. He also has bought an FX6. So it's a new generation of Sony, but they still take the same lenses, same lens mount. That kind of stuff is wildly important because, for instance, that really cool DJI only has like a couple compatible lenses currently. So you don't want to limit yourself in some of those other ways just because it's the newest camera in the program. And then going old school, this is like what I used back in high school and college, HDV, mini DV tapes. My first camera was a high 8mm that I bought in high school. So when you recorded to tape, it was still technically digital, but when you processed it into the system, it moved in real time, if not slower, when it actually do what's called a batch capture. So I'd like to kind of show you this. So if you shot 10 hours of footage, you'd be waiting 10 hours to get it all on the computer, so then you could have a file, and then you could start storing it and organizing it for editing. And I still have boxes of these tapes, so it's also really expensive. It's like 20 bucks for like 4 or 5 hours of filming, where here you just dump the card, clear it off, and go shoot again. So moving into that new realm. Any questions about these smaller systems or older systems? No? Now, there's no reason that you couldn't potentially combine certain scenarios. So some of these cameras will have, like this one is Brandon really needs. I was actually giving that back to him. But say you need to get into a tree. You talked about different POV shots for the monster. Maybe you want the smaller camera somewhere in that location and you can match color later, which is kind of a pain, but doable. But you're putting that extra time on your post team to figure out how to match that color, and that can be kind of a stressful thing. But if you're going black and white, now you're just matching contrast and things like that, so it's a little easier to do. But you might think about a smaller thing for a particular shot. For instance, if you wanted to utilize the car mount you're going to put this on the car mount way before you're going to put the red on the car mount, because our car mount's not that awesome. But it can hold a smaller system great. So be thinking about what you're trying to accomplish, and that'll help us figure out what the best systems are in those places. And technically, the C100 does C-Log. That was before there were options. So this does the original C-Log codec, which is a great one. The R5 does have C-Log in it as well. But again, you're dealing with overheating issues and stuff. If you're going this route, you would probably want to just stay with multiple C100s. All right, so let's look at, we'll just start on the front here. We have our EVA 1. Like I mentioned briefly as I kind of ran through it, this camera is just a workhorse. We have done hundreds of projects with this, and it travels well. It has 4 batteries. You would be able to shoot all weekend without charging a battery. It's pretty awesome. Huge component to this because you're saying you want to be outside for the majority of the shoot. It does have a side handle and this top LCD screen that need installed, not overly complicated. That's not too hard. That's something I can teach you pretty quickly. This is my least favorite menu system of all these cameras. A lot of times before Zoe goes out with it, I set it up before. I'm just like, shoot in this mode, don't adjust that, because it is not very intuitive to me. And I'm referring to working with Sony and Canon and Red and Blackmagic and a lot of other menu systems in comparison to what we're going to talk about. So I don't like the menu system a ton, but this is 2023. You can get on a YouTube video in a heartbeat and figure out, oh, how do I get back to 24 frames per second from 60? So that's not a deal breaker. It shouldn't be, but you'll need, if your cinematographer is Aiden, he needs to be working with this before you go out. Don't figure it out on the fly. You'll get pissed and you'll lose time. However, overall, it's a really nice image. I don't love the color out of it so much, but it does a 5.3K sensor that scales it down to 4K, just like the Red or C100 goes from 4K to 1080p. And so it has a lot of ability there. Probably 2 of my favorite things, dual ISO, so you can crank it to 2500, it'll look great. The other thing is it has actually 3 things. So if you're going to come up a little closer, I should have pulled a monitor. And I can show you as you guys kind of take, and you'll be able to play with it after I go through this. If you look, you can see you can see my squares, those boxes. That's what's in focus. So as I lose focus, this has probably my favorite focus meter of any of the cameras. So you can be out in a really, really bright, really crazy environment, and you can see what's in focus. Staying in that same mold, I hate this little monitor. It did have like a wind or a sun little guard over it. It broke within the first week. So that's been a pain. An electronic view, an EVF would be amazing, but we don't have that ability. So there's a lot of covering it, seeing if you can do it. But I have shot a bunch of nature with this. We shot a lot outside. It's doable. Now, the electronic ND filter, just like that, you're getting exposure adjusted. Huge advantage when you're in a run and gun, Blair Witch style type project. Let's see. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Yeah, that's probably for the most part. Oh, and it takes SD cards. So a typical SD card, you'll run all day. You are not switching through SSDs. You're not switching through heavy, expensive media. One big 256 card probably handle the whole shoot. Another really big perk. Questions about the EVA 1? No? Okay. Like I said, really great for a project like this. Really good for run and gun. We've used it on so many things. The Blackmagic 12K, and that retailed around like $8,000 when it came out. It's probably somewhere around like $5,600 right now. The 12K we bought for $10,000. Not even 2 weeks later, it dropped to $6,000. No particular reasoning that I've ever been able to find, but I think it was still worth it at $10,000. The Ursa Mini is one of the strongest cameras in their lineup. They ran off the 4.6K version for years and still sell it. And this is almost the exact same camera, but does up to 12K. It takes the big Anton Bauer batteries, heavy. They don't last as long. You got to pack a bunch of them. I usually have a separate bag just for the batteries when I use this type of stuff. They're really really powerful. They'll run pretty long considering what you're going through, but ultimately it just is extra weight, extra stuff to carry, extra things like that. Currently, we do not have any internal cards for it, so we have to come out with the USB-C, and then that's why I have this bongo tie on the top, because that holds my T5 or T7 SSD to record to. The one nice thing is you can go straight from that card right to the computer, and it's fast enough you could actually just keep editing on that project. In a race, in this case we're kind of treating it like a race on a deadline like this, not a bad thing to have. However, that cord is flimsy, it comes loose, it doesn't lock in. I've had it interrupt filming before because it was a bad cord. So I now pack extras. So you run into those issues. However, it's capable of 12K 60p. That shoots 36 gigs a minute. Absolutely insane. But if you've ever shot on like 35mm film or something, you just kind of get in that capacity of, all right, plan it out well, rehearse it a couple of times, don't shoot like documentary all day long, get your shot, come back out. The problem is, just the fact is, everything that comes out of this camera is in RAW, Blackmagic RAW, so you have to process in DaVinci. Or you have to get a plug-in, which apparently is free for Premiere Pro, but every time I've tried to just find it quickly and download it, I end up just, by the time I keep looking and getting the wrong spam or whatever, I end up in DaVinci processing the file to ProRes, and then I go back to Premiere to edit. So you have a bit of a workaround there. Does have the ND filters, like the EVA 1, and the C100 has those as well. Not mechanical, so if I get this call every year, camera's broke. It's really just between two different ND filters. So not all of you can see that yet, but play with these things. Ultimately, the menu on this, way more transparent than the Panasonic. If you know what you're looking for, you'll find it fast. If you don't know and you're just navigating and just playing with it, there's not too much to confuse you and throw you off, and it's organized well. So that's something I appreciate that Blackmagic has done better. Any questions about this one? Also, an EF mount came with a PL mount, which is kind of a higher end level glass typically. I had to go in and replace that lens mount so that we could match it with our EF. And that was a little tedious and a little stressful, but it wasn't bad after I've done one. Now it's not too bad, because I had to do it a few times since. Okay, working into the red system, and we'll put a new battery on when you guys are playing with these. The red is, I'm going to let it fire up and probably, I'll just talk. It's basically a camera with a sensor. So you have to shut this thing down. You can't just turn it off. You do not want the battery to die on it. You want to let it shut down. You have to get the temperature calibrated to the location. So if you're shooting this weekend and it's 108, you're going to have to calibrate the camera to that temperature. All of this adds time. All of this is complicated if you don't remember to do it, and it won't run as efficient as it could if it's not calibrated to that location. Now, if it was 105 today and you knew tomorrow was going to be 110, you could go to that location at that time, calibrate it, save that temperature information and the metadata, and reload it tomorrow. It's real common for what they do with the Arctic type shooting or underwater, so that way they just get right in and they're not burning energy when they're shooting in those types of locations. Our most expensive camera only takes very specific SSDs, proprietary, made by Red. It also can only be dumped into the system, into your computer, from that same SSD reader. So you have some of those things. Red, that's where Red gets really pricey, is there's not any third parties to make these things, and they just kind of name their price. Again, takes the same big battery, heavy, clunky, but where it does benefit over the 12K in a couple of ways is it doesn't have a cord coming out to that reader. It's actually internal. Thank God, because that is a mess with that camera currently, which is why we're trying to get that part in. Also doesn't have an electronic viewfinder. You're working everything off of this monitor here. And I should say, without the electronic viewfinder, I still have ways around, wireless transmitters that will send to a monitor, so you could be in like a closed off location. You could HDMI out to another monitor, so you could try to see it better. But if you're in direct sunlight, that just makes any of these cameras hard to utilize without all those pieces. 4.5K, up to 120 frames per second. There's compression ratios in here. Not very many of these cameras have that. So depending on where you set your compression is going to burn up energy, battery, and media, but you'll have higher quality for a lower compression ratio. You'll have more battery, you'll have more media if you go to lower one. Interviews, I shoot at like a 15:1. If we're going to do like some really nice fight scene, for instance, and we know we've nailed that shot, we've rehearsed it for 2 days, I'm probably going to go down to like an 8:1 ratio and get it higher quality. So really fun, nice to use, it's great to have on your resume, but it's probably not the best run through the field camera just off of weight alone and the clunkiness of everything. So any questions about any of those right now? So these are called goalposts, and this is your exposure reading. So you see how, as I move it, that sounds bad. See how I'm getting more darks here? Yeah. You're getting that represented there. The blue is blue tones, green, obviously green's stronger because we're looking at a green screen. So that's your goalpost. Okay. And if you guys are interested, I'm certified for the Red camera. It's the only system that like I've actually gone out and paid to like go take a class just on that system, but they are the most complex and certain component. They're probably the most capable. I should say, maybe not most complex, but most capable. You can dial everything into like 0.01 degrees on anything in this camera, which is where it got kind of a bad rap when it first came out because people kept setting things up wrong, is really my opinion. They just were like, oh, I'm used to a Canon, and I just push record and it works and it comes out pretty nice. Here, you can absolutely ruin your shot if your settings are off. It doesn't really guide you the same way some of these cheaper systems might. No, that's a great question though. And those are some of those things as we're going through and you're able to like go by one at a time and look at it that you can definitely ask too. So this is it's more studio based, but this was a Blackmagic 4K before the Pocket Cinemacam 4K. So if you Google Blackmagic 4K right now, it's hard to find this. However, this thing is still for sale. First ever 4K camera in the program, outside of stills mode, but for video. It's one of the things that I don't like. I kind of like, but it's not as practical anymore. It records straight to one of these SSDs. So what's cool is it goes right over to, you can just start editing right off one of these. So it's one of those things that's nice, but it's a little more clunky than your SD cards and things like that. The worst thing that's going to be a deal breaker for sure is the internal battery. It does not have extra batteries. You charge it, have that battery, and then you hardwire it from there. Like I was telling whoever was in earlier, I ran it for an hour this morning, but I wasn't recording. It didn't take real long to charge, but you would absolutely be delaying. If this was your only camera, you could make it work, but you don't want to have to if you have other options. Shoots ProRes, really easy menu to understand. It's just all right in front of you. This is one of the ones that you can jump into the quickest. So you're formatting, boom, just like that. You're checking your metadata, you're setting up it's not, even if you go into settings, it's not that complicated to find what you need and get back out. So I just love the menu system for this camera. And it does 4K ProRes, which is really, really great. It's a great codec to work in. Variable frame rates wise, it's the weakest of all of these. It only does up to 30 frames per second, but that comes with the age. The software just wasn't engineered at that point to doing 4K when they ordered this was pretty impressive. So, and then, I need to get the battery for this one. Now, without a doubt, this would be the coolest camera to use for this project if we had the pieces for it. But we only have a battery. We don't have the proprietary SSD yet, so it's not able to do all of the codecs and things that we'd like. Currently, we're running these very expensive little CF Express cards. They don't look much different than an SD card, but this is what enables us to do 8K in the R5, 6K 60p in this one. And so it's a pretty cool little card, but they get super hot. They're pricey. Even the reader is like $70, where a reader for an SD card you can get for like $10, no problem. Now it does have the gimbal system. I have it all locked off right now because it's not entirely properly balanced. But if you were doing a chase scene, something like that, this would absolutely be the camera once we had all those pieces. Because you can pop it off, you can control the whole camera from the top handle. It's pretty cool. Other cameras do have top handles, and the C100 as well. In fact, the C100 Mark Is, if you don't have the top handle, you're not going to record audio at all. So you're kind of stuck with them. The handles come off super easy, almost too easy until you've been trained with it, just like that. But once it's all kind of in place and ready to go, and we've been able to test it more, I certainly want to see I was kind of thinking, even Colton, once you had all your stuff figured out, maybe those other pieces will come in. I've requested about another $4,000 to $5,000 worth of things that we need before it'll be the camera. But it's by far the most futuristic of these. Amazing autofocus, incredible image, lots of options frame rate and format wise that you just wouldn't have in some of these other cameras. The big negative is because it's living on a gimbal system for the most part, we can't put our heaviest, we can't put these heavy cinema lenses on it. So we're really limited on lenses. So if they don't approve those lenses, we're gonna be limited to like very small primes, which it'll be primes no matter what. In fact, everything on all of these except for that one is a prime. And we'll get into that more later, but you're gonna shoot a lot of prime lenses for this semester. Yeah.
Does it ever have a problem with like calibration on that gimbal system?
So when I was testing it this morning, and I don't mind burning through the battery trying to figure it out today, it was reading it fine for 1 minute, and then all of a sudden it just dropped, and it just didn't like how the balance was. And so I moved it around a little bit, reset it, turned it off and back on, got back to recenter, went fine for a second, and then it dropped again. So there's clearly some learning on my end before I even have a chance to really show you guys. But in this case, it'll probably be one of those scenarios where you guys kind of learn along with me, so that way you're not waiting on me. But there's nothing wrong with that. We get a lot done faster that way. So I do want to think of projects that can be utilized for this, look it up, get some ideas. You can definitely check it out. The image on it is just amazing. I love what it looks like. The monitor is great. Again, if we had a remote monitor, that's one of the things I requested, a remote monitor where I could control it from like 250 feet away if it's in another car, for instance, or on a car. But until then, we're very limited. We can see the potential out of it though, so get an idea there. And then that C100 has one of our nicer lenses on it. Probably not ideal for what you guys are trying to do for this project, but I'd say zero in on which camera system you're leaning towards and start brainstorming that story. Try to get some of that hashed out and look at logistically where you want to go and when you want to try and do it. So, because everyone's here, so you should be able to start hashing some of that kind of stuff out. And from there, that'll help Joey and I figure out if we can be there or not too. So, what do you think, Joey? What am I forgetting? It's a lot, and that's why I'm recording it, so we can upload this somewhere. And if you're going, oh, maybe I want to use that Blackmagic in like October, because you're going to do something in the building, then you can go back and be like, oh, here's some of the things I need to request, because you'll need a specific card. You'll need to make sure you have a charger. I actually have the GVM Lite charger on here right now, so it's not like it has to be proprietary. That's convenient, because in some of these cases, especially red system, you're stuck with. If it doesn't have a red logo on it, it's not going to work most likely. Cool. Let me get you guys a couple more Anton Bauer batteries. We'll stick those on there, and you can play with the red, and you can play with the 12K as well. But yeah, that's a lot of information. I think you guys will do better to kind of play with it and converse amongst yourselves. If you're asking me, I'd say you need to look towards C100 EVA1 for being out in the field, especially with that dual ISO. The Blackmagic has dual ISO, and I believe this does too, but I can't remember the ratings on it. Another thing to consider. The red definitely doesn't, and the early Blackmagic doesn't.